college course. These telecourses allow you to earn college credits at home. For more information, contact a college or university near you.
In order to survive, living organisms depend not only on each other, but also on their physical environment. The sun, the air, the soil. These non-living or abiotic factors provide the energy and nutrients that sustain all living things. Over time, life has come to depend on this physical infrastructure, creating the complex associations we call ecosystems. This coastal wetland may seem untouched, but many of its residents teeter on the verge of extinction.
Think about right in here. That look good, right amongst all this cordgrass.
Today, biologist Dick Zembel offers a helping hand.
1, 2, 3. Oh!
This platform will serve as an alternative nesting site for the endangered light-footed clapper rail, one of the rarest birds in the world.
The light-footed clapper rail is an endangered bird because it is very intimately associated with the salt marsh environment. It's lost about 75% of its historic habitat to development by people, and a lot of the 25% that's left has been highly degraded.
The clapper rail's home is the salt marsh estuary, a highly productive ecosystem which is itself threatened due to encroaching urbanization. At stake are the many benefits offered by this wetland. In addition to serving as a nursery for ocean-dwelling fish, salt marshes act as an important rest stop for migratory birds and buffer surrounding land from damaging floods. These benefits have evolved from the marsh's intimate association with the ocean.
The marsh is influenced daily by high and low tides, so the high tides circulate the nutrients that are produced here. The association with freshwater drainage brings in additional nutrients that support not just the vascular plants, but a huge variety of invertebrates, all living on the surface of and in this substrate, and literally being the dining table, if you will, of tens of thousands of migratory shorebirds. There's only a handful of plants that have adapted to this special environment, but the ones that have grow like crazy and produce an incredible amount of biomass, vegetational biomass.
This vegetation, in turn, feeds a host of other organisms. To help describe these feeding relationships, biologists use the concept of a food chain.
The vascular plants, the algae, those are the primary producers. They harness the energy of the sun, producing biomass, which is directly consumed by a primary consumer, the next step in a grazing food chain, salt marsh snail, for example. And the salt marsh snail, in turn, is being eaten by a willet, who in turn might be eaten by a peregrine falcon.
When these plants and animals die, Decomposers and detritivores complete the cycle of nutrients by consuming the dead or decomposing matter and making it available once again to plants.
The salt marsh is extremely complicated because many of the organisms, even the invertebrates, eat many different things. The same crab that mostly grazes algae in the morning might turn around and function as a detritivore in the afternoon. The next day, if it gets a hold of a clapper rail egg, it might function as a predator.
Because most ecosystems contain many interconnected food chains, biologists often describe these feeding relationships as food webs. We can see these webs represented in an ecological pyramid.
An ecological pyramid arranges organisms with similar feeding habits into trophic levels. Plants make up the first trophic level by transforming sunlight into organic molecules that support the entire ecosystem. Since plants use some energy for their own metabolism, they reduce the net available for the next level, the herbivores. Likewise, the energy used or released by herbivores reduces the energy available to support first-level carnivores. In fact, only about 10% of the energy in one trophic level is transferred to the level above it. Less energy means less biomass, which supports fewer organisms at higher levels of the food web.
The clapper rail is a consumer on many levels in the food chain. It's a generalist feeder and even operates very near the top of the food web. Clapper rails will virtually eat anything that doesn't bite back and that's small enough.
But even with its diverse feeding habits, the clapper rail is threatened by a lack of suitable nesting habitat.
The clapper rail interweaves the nest on the living stems of the cordgrass in which the nest is placed, so that the nest floats up and down on these cordgrass stems, sort of like elevator shafts. I just copied this principle when devising a raft that provided enough flotation so it functions virtually the way a natural nest would.
During the high tide, remember the wood, the nest, the cover, everything just lifts up and down on these dowels. You got it.
The regular ebb and flow of the tides not only provide the rails with a daily elevator ride, they also divide this ecosystem into distinct layers or zones.
If you want to be a salt marsh plant, you got to learn to hold your breath. You've got to be specially adapted, and the most adapted plant is the cordgrass. So the lower marsh zone is dominated by this cordgrass, and that's very conspicuous and obvious, very different appearance than the salt marsh succulents, which comprise the middle marsh zone. And then the upper marsh zone is that which transitions into the uplands, which are hydrologically not in or under the influence of the tides at all.
While it hunts in all zones of the marsh, the clapper rail nests only in the low-lying cordgrass.
Ready to shove off. Let's hit it.
Because these areas have degraded over time, Dick Zembel installed his nesting platforms, hoping they would improve the rail's reproductive success.
The very first time I checked the platforms, there were already a dozen nests with eggs on them, and I just couldn't believe it.
Oh, Lord. There's a beautiful nest in this, but it's still under pretty high or heavy cover.
We've got the number of rafts up above 100 now. It truly has been one of the most important things in the comeback of the clapper rail in this one particular marsh.
The clapper rail's success may signal the recovery of this entire ecosystem.
Okay, guys, she's got babies.
A welcome change after decades of human neglect.
people have lost their connection with the natural world. You know, for some people, the grocery store is where food comes from, and they don't realize that there's this intricate web of life out there that we're a part of.
The energy that weaves this web of life comes from the sun. Captured by plants, passed on to consumers and decomposers, this energy fuels another crucial process, the exchange of nutrients between living organisms and the physical world.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here on the briefing. The overall project is approximately 900 acres or so.
These firefighters have come to rescue this mountain forest, but they aren't here to put out a fire. They're here to set one. Prescribed burns like these not only help prevent future wildfires, they also help cycle nutrients in this important ecosystem.
All ecosystems require a source of energy, and our basic source of energy is the sun. Basically, it begins with the plants, which harness the sun's energy to produce carbohydrates. So basically, you have two major components of the ecosystem. You have the energy that flows through the ecosystem. That energy flows from the producer to the herbivore and on to the carnivores. The second important part of the ecosystem are the minerals and nutrients that are used along with the energy to form organic matter.
Some of these nutrients include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, which plants obtain from non-living sources in their environment, the air, water, and soil. In the forest, fire helps return nutrients to the soil by breaking down brush and litter under the trees.
You gotta learn to see what the tree can tolerate.
Fire is actually a really important part of the forest ecosystem in that it helps recycle nutrients through the forest, because in our forest here it's very dry and we don't have a lot of moisture to help break down organic matter. We have some pines, like coulter pines, that are actually fire adapted. The seeds of the coulter pine are so tough and hard that they actually require fire to break them open so that they can germinate and begin producing seedlings to replace the older generation forest.
Fire is just one of nature's mechanisms to cycle important nutrients, part of a series of pathways scientists call biogeochemical cycles.
A biogeochemical cycle is basically just the movement of important materials such as water from the environment to living organisms and then back to the environment.
In the water cycle, evaporation from oceans and lakes forms clouds, which release moisture as rain or snow. Living organisms use some of this water, but most of it flows back into the lakes and oceans from where it came. Another nutrient pathway crucial to any ecosystem is the nitrogen cycle.
Most of the nitrogen that occurs in the world is found in the air, and we can't really use the nitrogen that's in the air, but there are certain organisms that take the nitrogen and make it into forms that are usable to other organisms. Those are called nitrogen-fixing bacteria.
Plants absorb this nitrogen and pass it along to others in the ecosystem. When organisms die, they decompose and return nitrogen to the soil as ammonia. In a series of reactions, different kinds of bacteria then convert the ammonia into nitrates, which are used again by plants or returned to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. Forest fires play a key role in the cycling of many nutrients, and yet for years we've tried to suppress them. Now foresters are carefully reintroducing fire to this important ecosystem.
Since the turn of the century, we've been putting out all forest fires to protect the watershed and to protect the trees. However, we've also noticed that since we've been putting out fires, the shrubs that grow under the forest are becoming more thick and dense. And now when we do have a wildfire, they act as a ladder transferring flames into the canopy of trees. So you may get a crown fire where you're going to lose most of your forest. So fire can actually be real detriment to a forest, or it could be helpful. In our case of prescribed burning, the fire will burn less hot or less intense, and we can control it. So we can burn some of the undergrowth in the forest, and we can recycle those nutrients so that plants can use them. And we need to be really careful when we apply prescribed burn, because we need to keep it within the constraints that we've imposed on it. We have different tools that we use for lighting the actual burns, from handheld devices, what are called drip torches, and then what's known as a helitorch. We use that to do a lot of burning. You can get a lot of acres treated that way. We want to keep our forest, we want to protect it, so we will continue to put wildfires out, but then we're going to come back in and do prescribed fires where we can allow fire to enter the ecosystem under more controlled, less threatening conditions. I think in general, humans appreciate the forest. Without trees or other vegetation, we wouldn't have oxygen for us to breathe, and we wouldn't have them recycling that carbon dioxide that's building up in our atmosphere. So even though we don't live here, we're very connected to the forest ecosystem as well as other ecosystems.
In any ecosystem, organisms collect and cycle nutrients from their environment, which is itself shaped by many other factors, including the powerful forces of the Earth's atmosphere. Few environmental factors affect the living world more than weather. We can bathe in warm sun and gentle rain, or suffer raging storms and bitter frost. Predicting what comes next is a full-time job.
What we want to do in meteorology is to be able to forecast the future state of the Earth's atmosphere. In order to do that, we have to have a better understanding of how the atmosphere itself works.
Meteorologists gather information about the atmosphere in a number of ways, often from vantage points high above the Earth.
The nice thing about weather satellites is that sitting up there in space, we can get a view of what's going on over a large area at a single time from a single platform.
Several factors conspire to cause changes in the weather, but it all begins with the sun.
One of the reasons that we experience weather is that different parts of the Earth's surface receive different intensities of light and radiation coming in from the sun. This is a result of the fact that the Earth's surface is curved.
The sun's rays heat the Earth differently at different latitudes. At the equator, the rays are more concentrated than at the poles, where the same amount of sunlight is spread out over a greater area. As the air cools, it releases moisture as rain, creating the lush rainforests we find at tropical latitudes. Eventually, the air cools enough to drop back down to the Earth's surface. With most of its moisture lost, this dry air maintains many of the arid deserts of our planet, about 30 degrees north and south of the equator.
Another important factor causing changes in weather is the inclination of the Earth's axis.
The Earth's axis of rotation is tilted, and that gives us the variation in seasons that we observe as the Earth goes around the sun.
The Earth's axis of rotation always tilts in the same direction. In June, the North Pole leans toward the sun, exposing more of the northern hemisphere to the sun's rays. In December, the axis leans away, providing the southern hemisphere with more radiation. This variation in daylight leads to the changes in temperature we call the seasons.
Whatever its cause, the differential heating of the Earth stirs the atmospheric motions we know as wind.
If we heat one area for a period of time much more than we heat another area, we're going to produce a pressure imbalance, and the wind then blows in an attempt to try to equalize that difference in pressure.
The Earth's rotation modifies these winds into easterly and westerly flows. These global wind patterns also help drive ocean currents, which in turn have a significant effect on the weather.
For example, off the west coast of the United States, we have this cold current moving from north to south, and on the east coast of the United States, we have a warm current that's moving from south to north. Along the west coast itself, we tend to have a cool climate being influenced by the cool water conditions, and on the east coast, we have a much warmer, more tropical climate with the warm current coming from south to north there.
What we call climate, weather patterns that prevail over long stretches of time, has a profound impact on the living world. The climate of a region, especially its temperature and precipitation, controls the type of organisms that can live there. Biologists call these regions biomes.
A biome is a large area of land that's characterized by a particular climax vegetation. It's what we think of when you talk about a desert. You immediately get a picture of what we're talking about.
For the same reasons different biomes occur at different latitudes of the Earth, we see similar biome changes ascending a mountain.
As you go up, you're actually changing climate in that you're seeing a colder climate, so you'll have temperature changes. You may also increase precipitation, so we've got a combination of more common freezing events, greater amounts of precipitation, combining to give you a change in the type of ecosystem that you see with elevation.
At high altitudes and the upper latitudes of Canada and northern Europe, we find the coniferous forests, so called by the cones they bear. Enduring moisture and cold temperatures produce thick groves of pine, spruce, and fir.
Coniferous forest tree species are very good at enduring cold weather. They have very tough needles. They can maintain them throughout the winter. The shape of the trees is designed to help shed snow loads common in colder climates.
At lower elevations and latitudes, we find the deciduous forest. Accustomed to high rainfall and moderate temperatures, these trees drop their leaves to prepare for winter.
The key abiotic factors in a deciduous forest are that you have a sufficient amount of water available to support the growth of these kinds of trees. Although there is a cold season, it won't be as strong as more northern latitudes where you'd see a coniferous forest. You may achieve snowfall and have some cold temperatures, but the deciduous trees have dropped leaves to avoid that.
At the same general latitude as deciduous forests, a drier climate produces rich meadows and grassland prairies.
Characteristics of a grassland biome are a relatively low amount of rainfall, and the vegetation within the grassland is supremely adapted to get the most out of this low amount of rainfall. The real trick that gives grasses their advantage in these water-limited environments is that they have a C4 metabolism. That's a shorthand for a particular biochemical pathway which really gives them an advantage in that what they can do is give you more growth per unit of water used than other plants are able to achieve. The overall system occurs concomitantly with very rich soils.
At the lowest elevations and at latitudes around 30 degrees, we see many desert biomes. We often find these hot, dry ecosystems on the lee side of mountains, in what scientists call a rain shadow.
As the air mass moves up and over the mountain range, this change in elevation causes a change in temperature, and precipitation falls from the air mass. The rain has fallen in front of the mountain range, and the shadow is behind it where dry conditions prevail. As a consequence, plant growth can be very sparse. Plants use a strategy that hoards water, things like the formation of cactus needles, which are really the leaves for the cactus. And the bulk of the plant that you see is really the stem being used to store water. Other plants use a strategy that's called drought deciduousness. They do have leaves, but when you get into the hotter, drier portions of the year, they'll drop the leaves just to avoid the water stress due to that.
Powerful forces shape the living world. Sun, water, fire. These abiotic factors forge the many ecosystems we see on Earth and have a profound influence on the cycles of life.